The room was dark and just the glow from the computer screens illuminating the room, set in a moon-shaped style with illegal devices and hacking systems fed into them. It was a personal cyber room and a secretive part of his left wing in his quarter. He used to sit there in peace and track down the money trails to the offshore accounts, hacking the IP addresses from the videos posted on the dark web, tracking evil high-profile people's lives, and pulling out their sensitive information through web searches, email, link clicks, and communications, invading their cyberspace. Jungkook started building John's security company when he was just 16. He had money and resources and was part of John's familia and an upcoming sovereign of the throne. Now he worked as a vigilante and made his own organization because the government and police were far away from controlling the crimes. Instead, they were helping people like businessmen, lawyers, senators, and bureaucrats in their bloody and sick activities. For 8 months, he was working on a mission to locate a facility in New Mexico a mafia leader was running. Teenage girls and middle-aged women were being transferred to that facility for the sket in trade through Bazan Harbor. Taking over the port was one of his aims in the mission. He knew human trafficking was spread around the globe like a wild virus, ingrained in the brains of pedophiles. He knew he couldn't vanish this debauchery from the soil of this earth, but he would put these mentally ill fecfexes under 6 feet and end the sick. Trade as much as he can in his lifetime, and born a generation who will take this disinfecting activity further in the upcoming decades. Jungkook uncovered that the leader was from Bazan, operating the facility, which leaves an option for who could be the boss of that torture fortress. The Kong, Dae, the mafia king of Kong Familia, they deal with the business of coca, ni, hero, opio, D's, and cannab. They treat their own women like possession, no freedom, just being slaves to their men, and even drug and abuse them. How they dealt with outside women was way worse. Jungkook was also planning to take them down. Not a nail of Kang's family will be seen on this earth by the end of this war. He traced their day and night activities, and the kernel of information that came to him was that they were actually involved in this skin trade happening through Bizan to the New Mexico facility and then to other countries, but no one came out as a leader, which means there was another group of morally corrupt men who had a connection with them, transferring money to Kang's accounts anonymously, buying girls and women they were providing. Jungkook's teams were working day in and day out to trace those accounts. Some low-life criminals were in the mafia's underworld, but they would PIS their pants before getting involved in such corrupt business. Knowing the mob networking in Bizan leaves Christopher as an option compared to others. He is barbarous and carries his depravity everywhere, like dark energy, and he better not be, because that will be the doom of his life and John's familia. But Jungkook can't put past him of this monstrosity. He leaned back in his chair, raking his hands down his face with exhaustion. He knew he fucked himself up by making a deal with Christopher. He had Jungkook's secret, and he gave him that on a silver platter. He knew Christopher wouldn't shut his mouth. What the hell he was thinking? He didn't care about himself, but he'd put Yin's life in danger. Christopher was like a hyena, and Jungkook gave the hyena a chance to put his canine teeth in his flesh, but Jungkook was a lion before the hyena could cross his defense. He would snap his neck and his jaws and rip the hyena's windpipe out. The more he was thinking about it, the more his mind went into the black space, where he couldn't think anything clearly, just the blinding rage was taking over. He mouthed to himself, "Get it together, man. Obsessing over it won't help you in the least bit." The computer screens were showing footage of Bizan Harbor, his Manor M Club, where Christopher was inebriated, and the basement beneath the M Club, where Jungkook kept criminals, where he put his hands down their throats to rip the information out. And if they are too loyal to their leader, he would have some fun with them, like slicing them up starting from their head to their toes. He flipped his laptop lid open and went to the dark web. He was scrolling through it when he stumbled on a video. The video was of a girl not more than 15, in a prison-like dungeon locked from head to toe. Hands were above her head, her wrists shackled up and the chain adjoining it anchored to the ceiling, only her toes touching the floor, and there was a man in a black robe with a hood over his head and a white, creepy-looking mask with a black smile and red crosses over the eye holes concealing his face. He strides towards a girl with a sharp and wicked-looking fey in his hand. The girl is screaming hysterically, her panicked gaze pinballing between the man and a sharp weapon in his hand, unsurmountable fear and terror in her eyes. Jungkook braced himself for what was coming. He was torturing himself by watching the video because it made his aim stronger, to drag these pedophiles out of their little cave and make them choke on their own meat. The girl was thrashing uncontrollably, twisting right to left and left to right. He grabbed the back of her head, fisting her raven hair, and the sleeve of his robe slides down his arm, revealing a dark mark tattoo just like a Lord Voldemort one. But the snakes coming out of the gruesome skull, like tentacles, 3 at either side of the cranium, looking like an octopus made of skull and snakes. Jungkook paused the video and narrowed his eyes on the tattoo, his breathing coming in ragged pants, dread settling deep in his stomach. He saw the same tattoo on Christopher's underside of the wrist. He murmured to himself, "Holy shh! This is going to be much more complicated because of Christopher. Maybe he had a link with Kang's familia. He underestimated Christopher. He was heinous and secretive. Jungkook needed to get his hands down on more evidence to prove it. The tattoo was significant, but he needed to raid them in their cave, which was the hard part because the government itself helping him out. It's not possible Christopher was doing that all alone. He had powerful man behind his back. The man lifted the menacing dagger, putting its sharp edge on the forehead just above her right eye, and slid it down, splitting the scown down to her brow and then her eye. Jungkook felt the bile coming up his throat, but he braced himself and kept watching, thinking of all the ways he was going to torture and kill this man. Gliding the dagger down her cheek, he did the same to her other eye, starting from her forehead down her left cheek. Her beautiful and innocent face, like a flower, turned into a horrific, gaping face. Snort leaked down on her lips, drool coming out of her mouth, and blood burbling out of long cuts across her face. The video stops and Jungkook shuts the lid with the full force of his arm, shaking. Surely he had broken the keys to his laptop. He stretched his trembling hand to his phone, just beside the laptop, and pulled out Taehyung's number, one of his skilled hackers, and pressed the telephone icon. Taehyung took the call at the first bell, and his voice echoed through the speaker. "Yo, Jungkook? I have sent you a video," Jungkook said, holding the phone tight like he was going to crumble it in his palm. "Yeah, I got it," Taehyung confirmed in his serious tone, totally different from his mischievous one. He was aware of the gravity of the situation. Trace the IP address before it is removed from the web now, Taehyung replied. On it. Jungkook ended the call and flicked his eyes toward the large computer screen in front of him. It was showing the hallway outside of his cyber room, and felt an ease in his body at the sight of his wifey. His little wifey looked toward the door to this room and narrowed her eyes, and, after a moment, excitement shone in her eyes. Jungkook's face pulled into his, half-lazy smirk. Oh so, his little wifey is being a curious little bird, flying towards her cage. The hawk will welcome her. She moved towards the dark marble door and fumbled with the doorknob. Jungkook stood up from his chair, moved towards the door and jerked it open. His little bird was startled at the force. From the moment he told her that she needed to inform her parents that she got married to Jeon Jungkook, no matter how long their wedlock ran, she was stressed and apprehensive. She was thinking of talking to Jungkook to make him cancel their trip to Phuket, Thailand, where her parents live. She was not ready to meet them, even though she missed her father like hell. The last time she talked to him was 6 years before. She also knew her father was waiting for her one call. To listen to her chirping voice, she was embarrassed, not because she married at his back, but because of what happened years ago when she was 18. She was not the abuser, but everyone made her. The disdain in her stepmother's eyes, the smug grin on her stepbrother's face, and an emptiness in her father's eyes, like he couldn't figure out who was lying and who was telling the truth. Her stepmother never liked her in the first place, but she never hit her. That night, she slapped her puffy, floury cheeks, and no one intervened to stop her. After a few slaps, her father stepped in, garbed his wife's arm, took her out of her room with her stepbrother, walked out of the room, and slammed her door shut like thunder broke out into her room, and her little heart jumped into her ribcage like it would come out of her chest and fell in her palm. Her mutilated, bloody heart drifted into the memories. Tears sprung up in her eyes, but she wiped them off immediately. She wandered through the colorful bushes that encircled his deck house in a crescent shape and were scattered throughout the vast garden lining the mansion's stone walls. A gravel path was in the middle of the yard, starting from the first part of the manor to his quarter. On either side of the gravel path was carpeting of green, plush grass tickling her bare feet. Yin started to bite down on her nails. Whenever she thought of escaping her predicament, she began to engage in that activity. She peered over the beautiful blooming roses with their thrones protecting them and crouched in front of the bush adorned with red, pink, yellow, and white roses. She grazed the velvety petal of a white rose with her index finger and thumb, so exquisite and fragile but armed with spiky thrones to pierce the flesh of a palm if someone tried to tear them, a strange combination of weakness and strongness. She cruises her finger along the rose. A thorn pricks her index finger, causing blood to bubble from the wound. She grabbed the flower from the stem and ripped it off the bush, cutting her palm. The slicing pain speared through her palm to her arm, but she relished in that pain. She was just like a white rose in her hand, dangerous but innocent. She got up from her crouching position and flicked her eyes towards his intimidating quarters, her captive, the king of the castle. She strode towards the gravel path, walked towards Jungkook's quarter, and dabbed her fingers over the white, smooth petals, careful not to break them, but enough to smudge her crimson blood over the ivory petals. A stark combination. Gravel path giving way to marble flooring just outside the entrance. She entered the massive foyer, and only wood and black welcomed her. The sconces were glowing in the dark interior of the quarter. She passed the black leather set of couches and moved towards the hallway behind the foyer to go up the stairs. She padded towards Jungkook's room in search of him, opened it, and stepped inside, but as the realization dawned that he was not there, she walked out of the room and slammed the door shut behind her. She plods in the middle of the dimly lit hallway, scones on the wall cascading a soft golden glow. She peered towards a marble door just at the end of the hallway. Excitement and curiosity coursing through her veins, she went straight towards the marble door, a black, intricate door with white streaking. She grasped the knob and fumbled it. The door was locked. Her brows knitted in confusion. But the next second, the door opened with a jolting impact. Her heart jumped in her throat and pounded so hard it was hurting. Jungkook leaned in the doorframe, blocking the view at his back with his muscular and large body. He was wearing a black shirt with ripped jeans and a simple silver chain dangling out of his neck, relaxed and calm. But his eyes told otherwise as he raked them up and down her body, taking in her cerulean sundress falling just above her upper tight, a square neck with puffy short sleeves, and then his eyes fell on the white rose with bloody petals, and the intensity blared in his eyes, burning bright. He pushes his back on the open door and makes room to let her enter. She entered the dark room.
He pulled her towards the black couch and made her stand in front of him and a cocky smile on his face,
surrounding her
mischievousness
eyes
gleaming in his
to
eyes.
her right,
Yin
there was a
pinched
set
her
of
brows
black
in
leather
confusion,
sofas,
and Jungkook
just
pushed
past
her
the
onto the
cyber
couch.
setup with various
Leather
computers
groaned as
and
she fell on
laptops
her
against
back.
the wall,
Jungkook
and an onyx
put his right
high-backed
knee
chair
beside her thigh
and to
over
her
the
left
couch
there was
and
an
braced
office
his
setting
left
with
foot
an
on the
obsidian
hardwood
immaculate
floor.
desk,
He leaned in
files
towards
stacked
Yin,
on the
her
end,
breath coming in
lion-shaped
shallow
paperweight,
pants.
sitting there. She felt like she was in an alternate universe. Jungkook grabbed her palm gently in his. She flinched out of her awe and looked towards her husband with wide eyes and parted lips. He pulled her towards the black couch and made her stand in front of him and a cocky smile on his face, mischievousness gleaming in his eyes. Yin pinched her brows in confusion, and Jungkook pushed her onto the couch. Leather groaned as she fell on her back. Jungkook put his right knee beside her thigh over the couch and braced his left foot on the hardwood floor. He leaned in towards In, her breath coming in shallow pants. Yin asked in a whisper, "What are you doing?" He just kept gazing into her eyes. He took her hand, fisted the thorny flower, and pried open her palm gently. She unfurled her hand slowly, and he glanced down her palm. The small gashes in her palm, and white bloody rose, the sight was so fucking beautiful for him. He took the flower in his hands and lifted her injured palm to his lips, giving it a gentle kiss, and then leaving her hand. He twirled the flower in his finger, feeling the pricks of thrones. His wife bled. Why not him? He lifted his hand, fisted the flower, and grazed it over the left side of her face, and her eyes fluttered close, gliding it down her cheek softly. The only images that kept flashing in his mind were just of that poor girl. His heart squeezed with excruciating pain. The young girl's flowery cheek, her onyx beautiful eyes. She was innocent and pure, just like his wife. He closed his eyes, released a sharp breath, and flicked them open. Wine looked at him with wide eyes, with a glint of worry in her eyes. She knew he was in pain, which pulled a tired smile over his face, letting her see his distraught through his eyes. She asked him again as he slid the white rose with crimson splotches toward her breast. "What happened?" And he answered in a husky, deep voice, "Nothing, baby. I'm just tired." The flower paused over the swell of her breast, her every nerve concentrating on that insignificant contact. They were not even his fingers, but soft ivory, crimsoned petals. She pushed herself and said, "You should take some rest to get your energy back." And then there was the cocky smile back on Jungkook's face, and he said, "I am getting it back." And she couldn't stop but asked in breathy pants, "How?" "Playing with you gives me energy." "I was so hungry, baby. Thank you for being my meal." A blush crept up her cheeks, and he gave her his half-lazy smirk. Leaving her on the couch, he moved back and sat opposite her, the low-lying table between them. Yin looked at him with a frown, but she saw he was sated and relaxed. She felt a butterfly escaping the cage she was keeping them in, brushing its wings around her heart, making her swoon over her Jungkook. She closed her WWD legs, and the wetness started to pool again, even though he cleaned her up with his, and she thought, God, this man making her go crazy. He still had his hard N. She kept looking at it, salivating, when a deep rumbling voice echoed, "Are you done with your curiosity, or is there something else you want to find out about?" She swiped her eyes up, meeting his piercing onyx gaze, and licked her dry lips, pulling Jungkook's attention towards them. She asked hesitatingly, "Can't you cancel the trip to Phuket Island?" "And why should I do that? A honeymoon on the island is romantic, right?" Jungkook said with a devilish grin. She swallowed the lump in her throat, caught the wandering butterfly to put it back in its cage, and pushed the words out. "You are not the romantic one," Jungkook retorts. "You know about me a lot, huh?" "I don't want to visit my parents right now," she said, steeling her spine. And he asked, "I see, but why is that?" "I need to wrap up my deals for my art pieces. There are a lot of buyers, and I am swarmed. Little bird is growing, I see, but that is not going to hinder our plan. I know you have a lot of people to entrust your work until you are back, or I can help you put someone in charge. I like to do my work on my own." He stood up and took deliberate steps toward her, grabbed her cheeks hard with his hand, and said, "Oh yeah, diligent birdie. I admire it as much as I admire that pissy of yours, but I am not going to cancel our trip. I have some business meetings to deal with in Phuket, and I want my wife by my side. You understand?" Her eyes glistened with tears at how hard Jungkook was squeezing her jaw, her lips puckering out in a pout and teeth cutting into the soft flesh of her cheeks. "Understood." A squashy sound escapes her mouth. Satisfaction shone in his eyes, and he loosened the rock-hard grip on her mouth and pulled his hand away after a second. He shoved the same hand in his back pocket, took out her panty, and threw it in her lap. He leaned in and placed his lips softly over hers. The aching in her jaw lessened from the warmth and softness of his mouth, but just as he leaned back, releasing her lips, an indignant feeling curled deep into her stomach and spread throughout her nerves like wildfire. He kept staring into her eyes and said, "Go pack your things. We are leaving in the evening." Her eyebrows knitted in confusion. They were going to leave tomorrow. Why did he change the plan? Oh yeah, due to her protest. Her lips pulled back from her teeth in a snarl but didn't utter a word. He says in his baritone voice, "Good, don't ask me questions and just do as I say." She stood up abruptly and yelled, "Fuck you!" And without wasting any time with his territorial bullsh, she turned towards the door and ran out of his cyber room. 17 years before. "So where are you coming from, young man?" her father asked, walking towards the lawn. "Kwan's villa." He darted his eyes towards the man. "The Senator Kwan, right? Are you his grandson?" the man mused. "Yes," he nodded. The boy and the man stood in front of the 6-year-old blonde doll. "Hey, baby doll, look who's here to meet you." Her father cooed to her, and she blinked in confusion, trying to recognize the little boy standing beside him. Joe fidgeted apprehensively and wished she wouldn't say anything like he was not her friend, and it was the first time she had seen him. But then suddenly her lips pulled in a delightful smile. Joe released a grateful sign. His eyes sparked with mischief. "I'm gonna go buy your new potted plants you asked me for. And some blueberry muffins." His daughter chirped, and he came behind her, engulfed her into big arms, and then tickling her. "How can I forget that baby doll?" She yelped and squealed. Her father backed away, chuckling, and after kissing the top of her head, he went towards the entrance. Joe plopped down beside her, and the little girl asked, picking up her brush, "What's your name?" "Joe." She mixed some golden and yellow colors in the palette, moved the brush to the canvas, and painted a circle above the jagged gray mountains, black shadowing the sides and bottoms. Too neat and clean for just a 6-year-old. Her hands weren't even betraying the shake. She was confident in her skill, like she was sure she could paint the world exquisitely, not a color out of place. She continues, as she keeps painting a golden yellow sun. So, Joe, are you here to be friends with me? He narrows his onyx, doe eyes on her, the wind blowing long strands of hair off his forehead, and asks her, "How do you know I'm here to be friends with you?" "You lied to my father Dumbai, or why else would you be here? To kidnap me?" "You got a big mouth, little girl," Joe said playfully. "Not a big one, just a smart one." She shrugged. Joe chuckled at her response, and a blush crept to her cheeks. "Are we friends now?" Joe asked, dipping his head to get her attention. The little doll leaned back, narrowing her eyes on him, and said, "We can be friends if you want me to teach you how to paint." There was a challenging gleam in her eyes. His mouth hung open and looked adorable, the little girl pulling her lower lips under her teeth to hide the smile. "I'm not interested in painting." "Then I can't be friends with you," the little girl said with nonchalance. But deep down she was anxious. She didn't want that adorable boy to go right. She barely had any friends. Not that she didn't want to, but everyone thought she was boring and never felt invited anywhere. Her big brother got all the attention. Her eyes dipped, shoulders slumped, and she felt alone all of a sudden. "All right, we can do that, you manipulative little girl." She looked at him, wrapped up and thrilled at his words, and reached her hand out to him. He grasped her tiny hand, sealing their friendship with a handshake, both of them smiling wide at each other.